Now welcome to another lightning response video, where this time we've got a question from Sergeant AJ who asked, "Hey Thor, I'm curious, what do you think is worse, The Last Jedi or The Acolyte?" Recently I rewatched The Last Jedi for the 7th anniversary, and I think The Acolyte is worse. I am not the biggest fan of The Last Jedi, but I can at least find some decent moments throughout the movie, like the visuals or the characters having a few bright moments, such as when R2 reunites with Luke. That is actually my favorite R2-D2 scene in the sequel trilogy. However, with The Acolyte, I find it really hard to like any of the characters. There were a few characters I liked to some extent, such as Sol and Yord, but everyone else sucked. Also, I feel like the writing was a lot worse in The Acolyte. I am not defending The Last Jedi by any means, but I find that the characters were not always bad in that movie. I always enjoy your videos, keep up the great work. Okay, so I also rewatched The Last Jedi a couple months ago for the first time in years, and the conclusion I came to, and I did a video about this, I know, but the conclusion I came to was basically that it's a bad Star Wars movie. It was a really, really strange time to do a deconstruction of Star Wars and the Jedi in the second to last movie of the Skywalker saga, especially one coming off the heels of The Force Awakens, which had all these mysteries that really didn't get addressed or answered at all in The Last Jedi, which made it feel rather disconnected from pretty much everything else. And then it also had a sort of dead-end ending that doesn't leave anything for the final film in the trilogy to really work with, hence they had to bring back Palpatine, and we all know how that went.
Somehow Palpatine returned.
All that said, if we take out the Star Wars aspect from The Last Jedi, if we look at it as just a movie, well, I don't think it's a terrible one in its own right. I certainly don't think it's a great movie or even a really good one. I think it has some pretty serious storytelling problems or flaws, things that don't make a ton of sense. Like how the First Order handles the Resistance ships. It just chases 3 of them for like 18 hours with an entire fleet of ships while it's supposed to be taking over the galaxy after destroying the Hosnian system and crippling the Republic, but for whatever reason, it's got like, again, a dozen ships chasing 3 ships that are running out of fuel when there were absolutely other ways, quicker ways to have handled that. Furthermore, the whole Finn and Rose subplot on Canto Bight, it just does not work. It is terrible and feels like a side quest for Finn, because Finn is supposed to be a main character in the trilogy, and they had to do something with him, and I guess that's the best they could come up with. So again, I don't think it's a good movie. It's got its problems just as a movie, again, taking the Star Wars out of it. But I do think there are some redeeming qualities there. I can understand why some people enjoyed it or took something away from it. In fact, that's what I often hear from those who did like it. Not so much that they think it was the greatest Star Wars movie ever, though certainly some do think that, but rather they liked something about it, about the movie itself. Maybe they liked the message of the movie. They liked that Luke Skywalker. Maybe they're not a huge fan, maybe they are, but they liked that he was broken and humanized, they'll often say. That it all resonated with them and they connected with it, and it meant something to them to see Luke broken and to ultimately kind of pick himself back up in the end. Which, that's great if it meant something to you. Who am I to say something can't mean something to you personally, or that you couldn't have enjoyed it? But for me, why I didn't like it is because Luke represented something else entirely. He represented perseverance and hope in the face of the darkest of times. He is that one person who will never ever give up no matter what. Because, let's be real, we are all in our own lives going to have to deal with some pretty hard times. We're all going to have to deal with some flat out terrible moments that threaten to destroy us. All of us are going to have a time or 2 or 20 when it feels easier to just give up than to try fighting through it to see tomorrow. I have certainly been there before myself. I've had my moments where you honestly can't believe this is happening, where you literally try to wake yourself up because this has to be a dream, that this cannot be happening right now, but it is happening. And when you realize that, you don't know how it ever gets better, how life is ever going to be the same ever again. And so for me, Luke represents someone that goes through some really, really hard times, but he always stays strong, and again, he never gives up. And that truly means something to me, means more to me than seeing him fail and fall and give up and then finally get back up again. So yeah, for me, The Last Jedi is an average movie that simply misses the mark when it comes to being a Star Wars movie. And like I said, most people I see talking about it usually don't call it a great Star Wars movie necessarily. Their praise for it usually has little or nothing to do with Star Wars, which is then kind of the opposite of The Acolyte. Generally, I hear people praising the Star Wars aspects of the show, that they like the lightsaber fights and all that. That's the one I always tend to hear how great the lightsaber fights are. And sure, they were fine. Some of them were pretty damn good, actually. I even think there were some decent characters in there in isolation. I liked Soul for about the first half of the series, and I thought Kamir or the Stranger was rather interesting, and certainly he had his moments too. But the story itself, the writing especially, was pretty rough. For me, this is an example of if you took the Star Wars out of it, unlike The Last Jedi, where I can appreciate it a little more if I don't think of it as Star Wars. But this is an example where if you took the Star Wars out of it, there's really nothing there, where it falls flat on its own. I mean, the ratings for it were already really bad. It was the least watched Star Wars show on Disney Plus, at least until Skeleton Crew came along, even though I thought Skeleton Crew was actually good, but it is seemingly lower rated, or had less viewership. But anyway, I think if you take the Star Wars out of the Acolyte, if you took out the lightsabers and the Jedi and the Sith and the Wookiee Jedi that everyone seemed to love, take all that out and no one watches that show. Virtually no one watches it or even gives it a chance or makes it a few episodes in because there's really nothing about the story itself that hooks you, in my opinion. I think it would just be regarded as a bad sci-fi show with a couple decent performances, if not for being Star Wars. There were also those who seemed to really get into the shipping aspect of it, and I'm not talking about packaging something up and sending it. I'm talking about the idea of really liking two characters together, with Kamir and Osha being something that a lot of people, again, you can do what you want or like what you want, but a lot of people I have seen really enjoyed that aspect of the show as well. So there's that. And for me, outside of the bad writing, I think its main issue was it clearly had a desire to make a case against the Jedi, and that desire outweighed its desire to just tell an interesting story in the Star Wars universe, or to just be an interesting story in and of itself. Because, like The Last Jedi, the Acolyte also tried to deconstruct Star Wars, or deconstruct the Jedi in particular. And I almost can't believe I'm saying this as if I'm praising The Last Jedi, but the Acolyte was nowhere near as clever as The Last Jedi was in that regard. It was far more overt and feels more like a negative commentary against the Jedi, rather than something that in any way really tries to make you think about these things. And mind you, I don't think The Last Jedi was super clever or anything. I'm not going that far here. But in comparison, it did a far, far better job. And in the end, Luke does come to his senses, and the film does say, yeah, the Jedi are the good guys, and we really do kind of need them around. Whereas the Acolyte ends with the Sith existing because of the faults and failures of the Jedi, and even shows, or ultimately ends with, the Jedi about to begin a massive cover-up that involves Yoda of all characters, and it's one that will ultimately lead to the downfall and destruction of the Jedi Order. And so, getting back to the question of which one is worse, or which one is better if you prefer to look at it that way, well, one says, The Last Jedi says that failure is the greatest teacher, which I can agree with, and uses, for better or worse, depending on your point of view, one of the most beloved heroic characters, not only in the history of Star Wars, but in the history of film. It uses him to make a point, which you might not disagree with the point, but the way it uses him to make the point you might not appreciate, all the while offering some really impressive visuals, but being bogged down at times by some nonsensical or completely unnecessary plot points. Sorry, Finn, they really did you dirty. While the other then says, the Acolyte says, that the failures of others justifies your own poor behavior in response, that even the best of us, and George Lucas has described the Jedi, on the whole, as the best, most moralistic beings in the entire Star Wars galaxy, but the Acolyte says, collectively, even the best of us aren't really all that great after all, or if you take too close of a look. All the while offering a few cool lightsaber fights and a decent character or two here and there, but a whole lot of very questionable decision making by some of the characters, seemingly in an effort to make the points the writer so desperately wants to make against the Jedi, and about the nature of good and evil itself. And so, which one is worse? Well, I'm almost saddened to say this because I never thought, or maybe I should say I hoped I would never again say something was worse than The Last Jedi, and sorry if you really like that movie. But I really never wanted to say something was worse than The Last Jedi, but for me, The Acolyte is the worse of the two. It may look like Star Wars, it may have some cool Star Wars visuals, but in my opinion, it is the opposite of what Star Wars should be in almost every way. While The Last Jedi, again, isn't really what I think Star Wars necessarily should be either, but it does make some good points, and it is a decent movie, I guess. Well, that's all I got for you this time. Now it is your turn to take to the comments below and tell me what you think about these two. Which one do you think is worse, or maybe you like them both, so tell me which one you think is better. Or you can always ask a question for a future lightning response video. You just start your comment off with "Hey Thor, ask your question," and I will try to get to it in a future video, though I get a ton of questions, so don't take it personally if I never select yours. Just keep asking. Hopefully I'll get to it eventually. Whatever the case may be, though, leave a comment below. Let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.